Welcome to our Dharma talk for our online day of meditation today, the 20th of May, 2023. And the title of this Dharma talk is After Insights and Awakening, What Then? So this talk has been inspired by a question that was asked on the last day of meditation, the last day of meditation a couple of weeks ago, which was about how we can integrate profound psychological insights into our lives as we move forward. And it was also inspired from an email I received from one of you asking about the relationship between aspirations, intentions, and precepts. And I take precepts to mean ethics. So I've spoken a lot at other times about how we develop insights, and how we wake up to ourselves and also wake up to that which transcends the self, nibbana, or the unconditioned. However, I've not talked much about what we do and how we live after our awakenings at both a relative and absolute level. The simple and short answer to this is of course, that after awakening with insights at any level, we carry on with the practice until we are fully awakened. Then I can only assume we live in a way that causes no harm and embodies and actualizes the Dharma. So there is a Zen koan, and it goes something like this. Before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. The meaning of this koan is, of course, up to the individual, but one interpretation that I can give it is that after enlightenment, we continue to live life and do whatever we need to do. However, there is a shift in our perspective and our relationships with ourselves and the world around us, a shift that is liberating and awakening. So today I'd like to address these questions, but with a bit more detail by revising and considering the four truths, including the Eightfold Path, at both noble and ennobling levels. And this will include some examples of awakening insights and how we can integrate these insights at both these noble and ennobling levels. So that which has come to be known as Buddhism began with the awakening of Siddhartha Gautama in northern India almost 2,600 years ago. The designation of the term Buddha means an awakened one who has woken up to the four truths or four realities. The four truths are in effect a pair of cause-effect relationships. Dukkha, meaning suffering or unsatisfactoriness, and the causes of dukkha, being the second noble truth. Freedom from dukkha, or nibbana, and the path to freedom, being the fourth truth. So two cause-effect relationships, dukkha, which is unsatisfactoriness, is caused by the origins of dukkha, which are greed, referring to cravings and clinging and grasping after pleasant experiences, ignorance, and here ignorance means we ignore experience as it actually is. We tend to not see clearly. We tend to get caught up in misperceptions and misunderstandings about the way things are. And hatred, which is craving again, but it's a craving to push away, a craving to push away that which is not pleasant. It's a craving or aversion or condemnation and rejection of experience as it is. So dukkha, the first noble truth. To the origins of dukkha, the second noble and ennobling truth. Third truth is nibbana. When there is no craving, there is no grasping, there is no clinging, and there is no greed, ignorance, and hatred, then there is no dukkha. And this is nibbana. And the way to nibbana is the release of these unwholesome and unhelpful tendencies. And it is actualized by the path of freedom, ethics, meditation, and wisdom, or the Noble Eightfold Path, or the Ennobling Eightfold Path, which is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort or energy, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So we've heard a lot about dukkha over the years. Anybody who's listened to me give talks will always hear about dukkha. I know dukkha very well, but like many of us do. So dukkha is, of course, the difficulties associated with aging, sickness, and death, pain, grief, lamentation, and despair. And here we refer to pain as emotional pain as well. Getting what you don't want, not getting what you want, and being parted from that which is dear to you. And in fact, it is clinging to this sense of a separate, individual, independent, enduring self. Clinging to that idea is intrinsically dukkha. It is intrinsically unsatisfactory. Dukkha is, of course, on this broad spectrum. One end of the spectrum, we have dukkha, which is the really painful stuff, the difficulties of aging and death, for example, when we're clinging to ourselves. And at the other end of the spectrum, I've often considered it as the unsatisfactoriness with our pleasures. Like I made a joke sometimes, the unsatisfactoriness of getting our soy chai latte not exactly the temperature that we really like it. So there's this broad spectrum of unsatisfactoriness. There's this broad spectrum of dukkha, which ranges from the subtle right through to the quite gross. And the third reality, which involves the realization of the unconditioned, which is also called nirvana in Sanskrit and nibbana in Pali. And this understanding of this realization of the unconditioned is related to a principle called dependent arising. And dependent arising is quite complicated. It's quite difficult to understand, yet it is explained succinctly in the suttas, something like this. When this is, that is. When this arises, that arises. When this is not, that is not. When this ceases, that ceases. And this principle explains how things come into being, and also how they cease. And it's the principle behind the Buddha's teachings. It is also the principle behind these four truths, which are in fact two cause-effect relationships: suffering and its causes, freedom from suffering and its causes, being here the Eightfold Path. So nirvana is when it arises, or nirvana is perceived or experienced or realized when we have no more craving. When there's no cause of suffering, there's no suffering. So that's one way we can understand nirvana. And generally, it's difficult to understand as it is beyond concepts and it's hard to perceive and realize. Yet it is a reality that can be experienced and has been experienced by countless meditators who have followed the Buddhist teachings. Also, I think many individuals who may have not followed the Buddhist teachings, but may have never heard of the Buddhist teachings, but yet followed them in principle. So Buddhist meditation practices are an invitation to discover this reality for oneself. So the four truths have noble and ennobling levels. Nobling levels involve the direct realization of nirvana, or the unconditioned. Ennobling levels, on the other hand, are moving towards this psychological freedom, but do not involve the realizations of the unconditioned. The cause-effect relationships, as demonstrated in the four truths, or the Four Noble Truths, can be applied to patterns in everyday life with everyday psychological difficulties. And these patterns, these relationships, provide ways for us to realize how we can ease everyday suffering, everyday difficulties, everyday forms of suffering. And at this basic level, the realization of these relative patterns could be described as ennobling. In many respects, the therapeutic changes that occur in psychotherapy could be considered as examples of liberation at the ennobling level. The fourth truth, of course, is the Eightfold Path, which I've mentioned a bit earlier. And it represents the path to, the path to psychological freedom, or nirvana. The 8 factors on this path are divided into 3 categories, which all relate interdependently. And the 8 factors are usually preceded by the Pali term samma, which is usually translated as right. And what I mean by right is not, it's considering, for example, if I was to go to Brisbane from where I live in Lismore, the right direction would be north. If I was to travel south, it would be the wrong direction. And in that respect, we consider these prefix for all these factors on the Eightfold Path. The prefix is it's preceded by right. In other words, we're practicing in a way that will lead in the right direction towards awakening. So we have right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness and concentration, right concentration. The first 2 factors, right view and right intention, considered as within the wisdom component. Right speech, action, and livelihood is considered within the ethics component. And right energy or right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration are considered within the meditation component. So ethics provides the mental composure and healthy lifestyles stability that enables us to produce wisdom, and enables us to meditate, to practice energy and mindfulness and concentration, to kind of see deeply into experience. And from the seeing deeply, well, the seeing deeply is insight, and insight is, in my view, the same as right view. And wisdom informs wisdom. This is right view, and right intention is what we understand by wisdom in the Buddhist perspective. And right view informs ethics, which further go on to provide the mental composure and healthy lifestyles stability that is conducive to meditation. And we sort of go into kind of a cycle. These 8 factors on the Eightfold Path are considered like spokes on a wheel. They turn in the direction of awakening, and they are dependent on each other. One factor taken out of this context can maybe not enable this kind of smooth turning of the wheel. In other words, these factors are considered as dependent on each other. They support each other, and they work towards together within context. They roll towards freedom. And this movement towards nibbana increases in momentum. The more we practice, the stronger it becomes. So in summary, the Eightfold Path could be considered as 1, reinforcing and inclining towards and developing and cultivating that which is wholesome. And 2, liberating and letting go, releasing and deconditioning and abandoning that which is unwholesome or binding. It's quite simple in that direction. It's either a wholesome direction or an unwholesome direction. In the first discourse of the Buddha, the turning of the wheel of Dharma, or setting in motion the wheel of Dharma sutta, which is the first sutta he gave to the five ascetics. He described the four truths almost like in a sequence, and of a sequence of kind of realizations, but also a sequence of almost like tasks. And of the first noble truth, dukkha, he said it is to be comprehended. Of the second noble truth, the origins of dukkha, he said it is to be abandoned. The third noble truth of liberation or nibbana, he says it is to be directly experienced. And the fourth noble truth, leading to the cessation of dukkha, is to be developed. Now, I agree with Stephen Batchelor here. Stephen Batchelor talks about these movements through the Four Noble Truths, or the ennobling truths, like tasks that almost happen in a sequence. However, in reality, they co-arise. What I mean by co-arising is that it's not like a logical sequence of one thing happening after another, a linear sequence. It's not like that. It is a interdependent co-rising sequence. Nonetheless, the way he talked about it, the way the Buddha talked about the four truths, is like they arise in a sequence. So when we have understanding, the task of the first truth, understanding dukkha, when we can see clearly into the nature of dukkha, it gives rise to the second truth, which is realizing the causes. And when we realize the causes, we immediately let go of those causes. It's like picking up a hot potato. There's an automatic reflex. As soon as we're aware of the damage of the heat on our hand, we automatically release it. And it's like that with this second truth. And the task of the second truth is to release that which causes suffering, or that which causes dukkha. When we do that, there's the realization of freedom in nibbana or nirvana. And relative nibbana, if we're talking about ennobling Eightfold Path. So this realization of freedom, the task with that is to recognize it, is to realize it, is to directly experience it. And when we do that, we realize a way of living it. And in my view, the task of the fourth truth, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, or the ennobling Eightfold Path, is to live that freedom, is to practice ethics, meditation, wisdom, and live our lives in that direction. Now, these four truths and the teachings of the Buddha are often symbolized by a beautiful lotus growing out of the slime and sludge at the bottom of a pond. And it is by turning towards dukkha, that we have the opportunity to grow up from it and wake up from our freedom. At the bottom of a pond, there may be lots of sludge and slime and compost and yucky stuff. And the richer the compost, however, the more beautiful the lotus that may emerge from that compost may become. And this is a beautiful symbol of the way Buddhism, what happens with Buddhism and what happens with the teachings and what happens with the Four Noble Truths. Is going through that sequence. It's like from our dukkha, awakening can arise. And from our experiences of stress and psychological turmoil and catastrophes, they can often lead to great awakenings and freedom. As Thich Nhat Hanh has said, the great and late Thich Nhat Hanh, he said, "No mud, no lotus." So as a therapist, I use the ennobling Eightfold Path to help myself and my patients see ways of overcoming suffering they may experience in everyday life. I sit with them and help them understand for themselves the mud of their lives, the dukkha of their lives, and how to transform it into beautiful lotuses. At this therapeutic level, ennobling right view could include an insight and a glimmer of awareness into a destructive pattern of behavior, for example, a pattern that perpetuates dukkha within ourselves or others. When we see it, we are presented with a choice. We are presented with an imperative of a choice, actually. We have no choice other than to choose. And we can choose to continue with this behavior or to be free from it. We can choose to feed into it or starve it. Similar choices arise when we become aware of a wholesome and helpful pattern as well, a helpful pattern of body, speech, and mind. We can choose to ignore it and do nothing, or we can choose to nourish this wholesome pattern, nourish the good with our attention and our actions. And these choices I would call intentions. If the intention is wholesome, it's called right intention. If the intention is unwholesome, it's called wrong intentions or unwholesome intentions. Intentions could also be considered as decisions or resolves, even vows. To be honest, we have intentions in every moment of our lives. We're either intending to, open our mouths and speak, or we're intending to move, or we're intending to walk, or whatever we're doing. We have an intention behind everything we do. It's this connection between mentality and physicality, actually, this intention to do things. However, when we think of aspirations or resolves or vows, they're more like intentions collected in a way that that are aiming towards something quite good, something wholesome, something helpful for ourselves. I know some aspirations could be harmful, but generally it would be considered as having a goal and aiming towards that goal. So it's an aim towards a specific goal. This happens with everyday intentions as well, but when we consider aspirations as intentions or vows as intentions, there seems to be some power and strength and commitment, a strong commitment behind it. So, as I mentioned earlier, if the intention is wholesome, it's considered as right intention. If the intention is unwholesome, it is called wrong intention. And as an example, at this ennobling level, we may become, for example, aware of a pattern of self-deprecation or taking responsibility for others' actions when they're angry at us. This may include high self-criticism or low self-esteem, and also a tendency to appease another's anger by going along with their demands, even if those actions may be harmful or unhelpful to us ourselves. We could see this pattern as insight. And with a bit of understanding, we may make the resolve to gradually stand firm and up for ourselves when really unrealistic demands are placed on us. And these actions of standing firm and up for ourselves could be considered as right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Traditionally, at both ennobling and noble levels, we have three groups of intentions. Intentions of renunciation, which involve letting go. Intentions of goodwill, which involve warm benevolence and compassion. And intentions of harmlessness, that involves compassion again, basically. And a resolve to stand firm or stand up for ourselves or to stand our ground could be an example of self-compassion and thus be a right intention. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood, then thereafter are actions based on our wise understanding and our best intentions. This could mean, as we understand it it's definitely as we understand it in as the Buddhist precepts, the 5 precepts, but also it could be kind of tailored to our specific circumstance. A right speech might be being assertive about something, being clear about something. And they are actions that are in line with our best intentions and our good understanding, and they are also inclining away from dukkha and towards freedom in the long run. And when we do this, we feel stronger, more empowered, more centered, more composed, clearer, and courageous. When we do this, we have more capacity to develop our minds and cultivate insight and serenity. And this cultivation is called meditation. So we're moving on to those other factors on the path here. The first factor of meditation is actually right effort or right energy. And sometimes this is understood as, I think in the root of the word virya, there's something about courage or, there's something about courage. I can't remember exactly how it translates, but it is sometimes understood as the courage is courageous. Right effort is courageous. It takes courage to look at ourselves, to turn towards our suffering, turn towards our dukkha, and courage to be aware with it, be aware of it, to sit with it, to be with it, and to understand it. It takes courage. So this is the first step of meditation, and that's followed through with mindfulness. Mindfulness has been described in many different ways, but one way we can understand it is being present with this experience, being willing to be aware of it and stay with it. And when that happens, we gather our attention around it. Our attention becomes very focused, clear, unified. Not only our attention, but our mental energies become unified, and we see very clearly what's going on. This is seeing deeply into our suffering, or seeing deeply into our patterns, and that seeing deeply is insight. So we're going around in a kind of a cycle here. We're going out in a wheel, and then with that insight, we have more aspirations and we have stronger intentions, and we go along in this path of waking up to our patterns and slowly and gradually reducing our conditioning or our patterns that are unwholesome and unhelpful. So I just want to talk a little bit about patterns. The way we are in the world comes about, the way we are and the way we experience life comes about because of many causes and conditions coming together, many of which are completely beyond our control. Things like our genetics, our social upbringing, the place we're born, the country we're born, the governments under which we live, and so on and so forth. All these things are out of our control. Yet there is something that we can do. We can choose how we act. And that choice and that action impacts on how we live our lives. It's like how we live our lives, how we shape our lives, how we become, how we relate to experiences that come our way. Now, psychological patterns and schema uh, can arise from our genetics, like we can be born that way. And other times we are conditioned into a particular pattern. Either way, whether we're born that way or we've learnt to be that way, we can do something with it. We can respond. We can heal. We can overcome, and that this is called confidence in a pathway. We have faith in the pathway of getting better. So sometimes psychological patterns arise because they're conditioned, and sometimes they arise because of learning. Now, learning that is based on implicit memories. There's two types of memories. I mean, there's lots I can talk about memories, but I'll just talk about implicit and explicit memories. Explicit memories are memories such as the facts of things, like the fact that, you know, England is in the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, that's a fact. I know it's true, but it's something, and it's something I've learned, but it's kind of a cognitive learning. Implicit memories, on the other hand, are things like knowing how to ride a bike, knowing how to brush our teeth. And I was listening on a webinar my partner was listening to the other day, and she's talking about how senior medical practitioners, and I could say senior psychologists now, know how to do a clinical assessment. And it's almost like it's an implicit memory. We just sort of do it. Whereas when we began doing these sorts of things, we had to remind ourselves and we had to get training, and it was a bit kind of clumsy knowing how to do it, what questions to ask and so on. So implicit memories are usually very good. I mean, it's useful to know how to ride a bike and how to cook a meal and so on and so forth. We don't think about them much, but sometimes they can be, they can arise out of horrible experiences or terrible experiences, like experiences of abuse or neglect as a child, for example. And these implicit memories then shape the way we behave in life and the way we respond to events in our lives. And with these destructive patterns, it's like we take on the messages that we got from particular incidents, and we take them on to be true. And sometimes, like traumas or neglect, we can take on those messages to be true about our core beliefs, like I'm a failure, I'm no good, I'm useless, nobody loves me, I'm unlovable. Whatever it is, it's like we live those patterns out, and there is a way to change them, and we can change them via the Eightfold Path, the Ennobling Eightfold Path. And this can include a process called memory reconsolidation, which some of you may know about. Memory reconsolidation is a process, as far as I understand, is a way of changing implicit memories that have been consolidated at a time when we may have been going through difficult circumstances, say as a child. And what happens with memory reconsolidation is that these, through various circumstances, these memories may become, they're called labile in the neuroscience language, but the memories come up into psychic space, so we re-experience them at an emotional level. And if we can re-experience those memories at an emotional level, and there's a mismatch between the information that is coming in, a mismatch between the message we originally received at the time of the trauma or the abuse or whatever it was, and a mismatch between what's actually going on, what's actually the truth of the reality of the situation, and the messages that we have imprinted, then it's possible that those memories will shift in accordance with what's really the way it is. And what happens then is these memories reconsolidate. So there's a couple of factors that are important in memory reconsolidation. The memory needs to be kind of stimulated, or memory needs to be kind of labile, like it needs to come up in clear awareness. So there's the emotional components of the memory up in the psychic space. There needs to be a juxtaposed message being inputted, being placed into that memory, like juxtaposed information that is really kind of like the opposite of the message that we received when we're having the trauma or whatever we're experiencing. And then it needs to be repeated. It needs to be repeated. And this then changes our memories and the way it doesn't change the memories. It doesn't deny the fact that, something happened, but it changes our perspective on it. So we don't take them so personally, and we can live a little bit freer. So I'm going to share a little personal situation, a personal event that happened to me. And I'm sharing it in a way where I can help, I can explain this healing at an ennobling level, this awakening at an ennobling level. So a few weeks ago, I was on a retreat, and I was getting quite focused, and some circumstances were happening where I started to get anxious. I could see the hindrances coming up, and there was a hindrance of restlessness, and I was thinking a lot about something, and I was worried that I might have upset somebody, and there's circumstances going on in the retreat that I won't go into detail about now, but I was just remembering this situation. I was just thinking of this, how I was feeling uncomfortable. I was feeling anxious. I was worrying. And then one day I was sitting, and I remembered an incident from when I was 8 or 9 years old. And at this incident, I'd come home from school, and I threw my bag onto the kitchen table, and I went and turned on the TV, which 9-year-olds do. I don't know what I was watching, something in the afternoon. It was black and white TV then. So I was just watching TV, and then my mum came home. She came home, and she saw my table on the kitchen table. I saw my bag on the kitchen table, and she started to scream and yell and get very angry at me, very enraged at me. And I thought, wow, I felt terrible. And my brother and I went to our bedrooms. We shared a bedroom at the time. And my mother continued to yell and scream, and then she dropped to the floor and started weeping and crying and shaking. And I think in those days, I think it was called a nervous breakdown. I don't know what we call it these days. But she ended up going to bed, and there, and somebody was caring for her. And my brother said to me, "Malcolm, look what you've done. Look what you've done, Malcolm." And this, I took this on as a message. Malcolm, look what you've done. So I felt a little bit responsible. I felt terrible, actually. I felt like I'd really caused great harm to my mother. So I'm remembering this, and this is on retreat. I'm remembering it, and I'm the 9-year-old, feeling kind of weighted and heavy. And then from somewhere comes my adult therapist self, the wise. I think some people call me wise. A lot of people call me compassionate. And I think I do have a bit of kindness, and I think that's a tendency that I have. This voice came from myself to myself. It said, "Malcolm, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're okay. You're okay. You don't have to worry about this. It's not your fault. It's not your responsibility. So after that, when I heard that, I started to shake. My I could feel this shaking. Sometimes I get shaking. Sometimes when I've done serenity meditation, you get these kind of vibrations going through. I've had that before, and I kind of let it happen. And then I just sort of let it happen. And I noticed my whole body was vibrating and shaking quite vigorously. And uh, I know from as a therapist, there's something called traumatic release exercises, which are about shaking. And when animals go into stress, they have this shaking process, and it's a way of dealing with the physical um, mm, the physical things that happen to us when we're in a trauma. So after that, I felt quite good. Yet there was still a kind of something that happened, and I work with that. But the point I want to make is that throughout my life, I often freak out when people are angry at me. I've often freaked out. I've often felt guilty that I've done something wrong. And you can see how this this pattern would have been ingrained. And I've worked with it. I've worked quite a lot with it. And now, when I had this particular memory, it's like I started to reconsolidate that memory in a different way. And the pattern has been laid down over, well, I'm 67 now, so how many years is that? It's about 58 years, something like that. It's been going on for 58 years. I've worked on it. It's reduced, and I've, gained equanimity about lots of things. And I've worked as a therapist, and goodness me, you have to have equanimity. You can't take responsibility for other people's suffering, because you'd end up a mess. So I worked on it, but now I can see it still, and I still have this pattern. So it's not like suddenly I have this insight and the pattern goes. I still need to work on it. But if you consider this ennobling Eightfold Path, you see this an insight, you have an insight, you have some clarity about it, then you intend to work on it. It's almost like, it's not even a conscious intention here, it's just a spontaneous intention. You can see that you're not going to feed into patterns of placating other people's anger. You're not going to fall into feeling responsible for another person's misery and so on. And it needs to continue. It needs to be repeated and over again. So what I'm saying here is that when we have ennobling insights, we still got work to do. It's not going to immediately change those patterns. We still need to act in ways that are in line with our insights and our best intentions, in a way that we're allowing these patterns to fade away. We're allowing, in behavioral terms, it would be called extinction of these processes. And the same principles are also involved at the noble level. And I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago on the unconditioned and the absolute manifest. I think I gave a talk on innate goodness. And I won't go into repeating that talk right now, because I've only got about 10 minutes left. However, I'll mention a few points. And the other day, I was opening Insight Timer just to get the timer going, and I read the quote, and it was a great quote. It was by Thich Nhat Hanh, and it went something like this: "Enlightenment is when a wave realizes it is the ocean." What a wonderful quote. I've probably heard that quote before, but it just reminded me that nobody gets enlightened. Nobody, no person gets enlightened. People don't get enlightened. Enlightenments get the people. Nibbana gets the people. And it is not enlightenment is not this or that. It's not a thing, but it can be realized and known as a reality. So before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. The continuum called the self ages and eventually dies, and the world goes on in a particular way. However, when we wake up, there's a profound shift in the perspective. Rather than seeing life and ourselves and the world around us from centralized within an ego, looking out from within like an egocentric perspective, there's a shift of kind of looking from the outside in. It's like a shift that from identifying with a wave in an ocean, struggling to maintain its individuality, or see the permanence within this big ocean. A shift from that to coming from the perspective of an ocean, recognizing there's a little wave down there, somewhere there, that's arising, comes into being, and then disappears back into itself. Recognizing that there's an infinite number of waves out there, all coming, all forming and changing and falling back into the ocean, arising and passing back into the ocean. And the only enduring thing is change and dependent arising. Dependent arising is this principle of how things come to be. And I'll just repeat the very complex, difficult to understand, yet it could be understood by that phrase that when there is, when this is, that is, with the arising of this, that also arises. When this is not, that is not. When this ceases, that also ceases. In other words, when there's craving, there's suffering. When there's no craving, there's no suffering. That's one way of understanding dependent arising. And another way of understanding dependent arising is this kind of endless interdependence, like things moving together, things arising and passing and kind of connected in this great web of something that we maybe call life or the universe. So in Theravada Buddhism, they have 4 stages of awakening, which are described as fruit and path. The path relates to an awakening experience, and the fruit refers to the realizations and the changes from that experience. A stream enterer, in Pali called Sotapanna, has a glimpse of Nibbana and is free from 3 of the 10 fetters. These fetters, I've probably talked about them before at some stage. I've got a talk somewhere out there on the fetters. There's 10 of them. The first, the Sotapanna is free from these, from that realization, a glimpse of Nibbana. The Sotapanna is free from identity view. Sakya Ditti is called in Pali. Sakaya Ditti, sorry. And identity view is the belief that there are personalities are people. People are personalities. You know, there's individual personalities walking around. Like I believe in the personality of Malcolm, and it's kind of like there's this fixed personality. It's a shift in that view. It's seeing individuals and beings as not fixed to those personalities. You're seeing beings as conditions arising and passing, you know, the continuums of body-mind processes. They're like waves. It's like putting a fence around a wave. You know, this is the particular way this wave is. Whereas a fence around a wave is just ridiculous. I mean, there's no such thing. So the Sotapanna realizes that. The Sotapanna is also free from attachments to rites and rituals. In other words, I don't have to how can I describe this one? It's an understanding that things happen because of cause-effect relationships. Things don't arise because of magic. Things don't arise because of, getting the favor of a god or something like that. We are the way we are because of causes and conditions coming together. That's an understanding of letting go of that rites and rituals. The third thing that the stream enterer is let go of is doubt about the validity of the teachings, realities of the Buddha's teachings. Sometimes this is understood as unshakable confidence. It's a confidence in dependent arising, a confidence in the reality of karma, meaning, actions have consequences. It's a confidence in the path to freedom. It's a confidence in the reality of nibbana. Then the second stage is called once returner, or Satagami. And in this stage, sensual desire and ill will is greatly reduced. The sensual desire and ill will are the next two fetters. Fetter is something that holds us back. The next stage is non-returner, or Adagami. And the Adagami is free from sensual desire and free from ill will. Pretty cool. The Adagami is also called, so the Satagami, or is called a once returner. The Adagami is called a non-returner, meaning they don't come back. They're not going to be reborn back into this world, into these conditions, into the world as we understand it. So non-returner, or Adagami, is free from sensual desire and ill will. And the Arahant is completely awakened. The Arahant is free from all the 5 lower fetters and the 5 higher fetters. And this includes attachment to the 4 meditative absorptions. In other words, even these amazing states of meditation, they're not attached to. These incredibly blissful, boundless states, they're not attached to that. Attachment to the 4 meditative absorptions, the Rupa jhanas, which are, I won't go into the details about that. Attachment to the 4 formless absorptions, in other words, formless jhanas, which are very high states of concentration and all the states of consciousness, quite very refined. The Arahant is also free from the conceit I am, and I've given a couple of talks on the conceit I am, this sense that this belief, it's not just a belief, it's a real experience that I am separate from another. I am something. It's called a conceit. And completely free from restlessness, which is this agitation and worry, and it's one of the hindrances. And also completely free from ignorance. In other words, they see things as they actually are. They know the truth. The reality, when I say the truth, they know the 4 truths completely. Okay. So sometimes meditation practitioners feel they have realized the stage of awakening and seek out confirmation. And it's easy to start to assess our own progress when we hear about these markers of, the 4 stages, and kind of wonder, where am I? What am I doing here? And I remember hearing about how when Ajahn Chah went to Insight Meditation Society back in the 70s, he had a lot of practitioners lining up wanting him to validate their attainments, and they were all kind of lining up and they're saying, look, I had this experience, and, am I a Sotapanna? Am I an Adagami, or am I a Satagami, and so on. And the way Ajahn Chah responded to them, he said to them, are you still suffering? And they would say, yes, I'm still suffering. And he said, well, you still got work to do. So I thought that was a great response. And there was a period in my life where I wondered about some particular experiences I had. And I spent about a year wondering about it and thinking about it. And I wasn't sure how to confirm it or not confirm it and so on. But then when I looked inside, I thought, well, I'm still suffering regardless. And what does it matter anyway? It's just an egoic thing, you know. Would an arahant, would an Atagami say, I'm an Atagami? I mean, they don't say that sort of thing. Why do they want to know that anyway? It's kind of like a sense of reinforcement of an ego, basically. So I think it's helpful to recognize that one still has suffering. Um, and it's useful to monitor our behaviors. Like we might have pretty amazing experiences, both at the ennobling level and even at the noble level. We might have these profound awakenings. Uh, and if we do, so be it. I mean, it's still great. It's fantastic. Usually what happens is you might have a profound awakening and you might kind of live in this kind of blissful state and everything's going beautifully, but then things start to fall away. Like there's the deterioration of that blissful state, or not even the blissful state, but that awakened state. There seems to be, you know, kind of issues coming in that may be questioning that attainment. So it's really helpful to monitor your behavior and compare it in a realistic way, not in a way that's self-deprecating or self-critical, but I compare it to the behavior of the Buddha or an enlightened one that people have a lot of respect for. And if it's not in line with those behaviors, if there's some sort of misalignment with what we would imagine the Buddha is behaving, then it's really helpful for us to make aspirations and intentions to act in that way. And again, I'm not saying it to act in that way in a self-deprecating way, but in a way where you're inspired and aspire to, in a way that you're correcting behaviors that may not be in line with awakened behaviors. So in this way, we are fulfilling the realizations and tasks of the Four Noble Truths and Ennobling Truths, and we are living the ennobling and noble Eightfold Path. So thanks very much for your attention, and may we all be happy, peaceful, and free.